One bright day in late autumn, a family of ants were bustling about in the warm sunshine, drawing out the grain they had stored up during the winter, when a starving grasshopper, his fiddle under his arm, came up and humbly begged for a bite to eat. "What?" cried the ants in surprise. "Haven't you stored away anything for the winter? What in the world were you doing all last summer?" "I didn't have time to store up any food," whined the grasshopper. "I was so busy making music that before I knew it the summer was gone." The ants shrugged their shoulders in disgust. "Making music, were you?" they cried. "Very well, now dance." And they turned their backs on the grasshopper and went on with their work. As this fable from Aesop shows, ants have been known as hard workers for thousands of years. The book of Proverbs uses the ant as an example against the lazy. "Go to the ant, O sluggard, and consider her ways, and learn wisdom, which, although she hath no guide, nor master, nor captain, provideth her meat for herself in the summer, and gathered her food in the harvest. How long wilt thou sleep, O sluggard? When wilt thou rise out of thy sleep?" St. Isidore describes ants in his Etymologies. The ant, formica, is so named because it carries bits of grain. It has great shrewdness, for it provides for the future and prepares during the summer what it consumes in the winter. During the harvest, it selects the wheat and does not touch the barley. When it rains on the ant's grain, the ant throws it out. The Aberdeen Bestiary identifies 3 characteristics of ants that were used as allegories for Christian education. 1. Ants move in an orderly fashion when looking for grains to store in their nest. They move in a single file line and do not beg for food from other ants in their colony. Instead, they follow the tracks of the ants who have already found food and bring it back to their nest. The Aberdeen Bestiary states that men who act in unity as the ants do will be rewarded. The Grand Medieval Bestiary compares ants to prudent folk, and the 2nd century work called the Physiologus cites Christ's parable of the wise and foolish virgins. Ants are like the wise virgins, who brought enough oil in their lanterns to wait for the coming of the bridegroom. There is even a parallel to Aesop's fable, where the foolish virgins beg for oil, and the wise virgins reply, "Lest perhaps there be not enough for us and for you, go ye gather to them that sell, and buy for yourselves." While the foolish were away trying to get oil, the bridegroom arrived and locked them out of the wedding feast. 2. When ants store grain in their nest, they divide their supply in 2, in case rain or dampness causes the seed to germinate and the nest to be without food for the winter. Bestiary writers use this characteristic to help their readers distinguish the letter of the law in the Old Testament and the spiritual fulfillment in the New. The Aberdeen Bestiary states that, "In the same way you, O man, should keep separate the words of the Old and New Testament, that is, distinguish between the spiritual and the carnal, lest the law interpreted literally should kill you. For the law is a spiritual thing, as the apostle says. For the letter killeth, but the spirit giveth life." For the Jews, who paid attention only to the letter of the law and scorned its spiritual interpretation, have died of hunger. 3. When foraging, ants are able to distinguish wheat from barley and only bring the wheat back to their nest. Barley was considered food for the beasts, and the ants were thought to avoid it. Job even says, "Barley grew for me instead of wheat." Bestiary writers used this as an example for Christians to avoid heresies and choose sound doctrine. The Aberdeen Bestiary writer says, "For heresy is like barley, and should be cast away, because it shatters and destroys men's souls. Therefore, Christian, flee from all heretics. Their teachings are false and hostile to the truth." Finally, ants were thought to be able to predict the weather. If rain made their food wet, they would open their nests and let it dry out in the sun. There is modern evidence that the ant antennae can detect subtle changes in temperature and humidity, which could help them predict when it might rain. Instead of bringing their food out to dry, however, it is thought that they build up their nests to prevent water from getting in. There is even a proverb, "If ants their walls do frequent build, rain will from the clouds be spilled." After St. Isidore discusses ants, he also mentions the following. "It is said that in Ethiopia there are ants in the shape of dogs, who dig up golden sand with their feet. They guard this sand lest anyone carry it off, and when they chase something they pursue it to death." These giant Ethiopian ants, or Indian ants as they are often referred, have a long history in the bestiary tradition. George C. Druce, in his article An Account of the Myrmecolion or Antlion, provides a description of the giant ants and how to obtain their gold. The animal in question is there called the Ethiopian ant, but in classical writers usually passes under the name of Indian ant. The earliest source of information that we have is Herodotus. According to him, the scene is laid in the northern district of India, where there is a desert in which ants abound in size, somewhat less than dogs, but larger than foxes. They burrow underground and heap up the sand which contains gold. The Indians go to the desert to collect this sand, each man provided with 3 camels harnessed together side by side. That is, on either side a male, in the middle a female on which he rides. The female must only just have parted from her recently born young. The Indians, being thus equipped, set out at such a time that they will arrive at the hottest hour of the day, for which during the greatest heat the ants hide underground. They bring with them sacks that they fill with the sand, and then return as fast as they can, for the ants detect them by the smells and pursue them, so that if the Indians do not get a good start while the ants are assembling, not a man could be saved. The male camels in time slacken their pace, but the females, mindful of their young, hasten on. And in this way the Indians return safely with the gold. It is thought that the ants will eat the tired male camels and buy enough time for the men to escape with the females laden with gold. Pliny, in his Natural History, mentions that the horns of one of these giant ants are displayed in the temple of Heracles, and their size as being miraculous. Pliny goes on to describe the ants as having the color of a cat and being as large as an Egyptian wolf. The Ethiopian ants are connected in the bestiary tradition to another creature, the antlion. Druce deduced that there were generally two strains of thought as to what antlions were for medieval writers, an Eastern tradition and a Western one. Each tradition refers to a completely different creature, though the names are the same. We have already discussed the Eastern Ethiopian ant, and that came to be conflated with the antlion. The East believed that the antlion was a composite creature with the front half of a lion and the back half of an ant. In fact, the Greek translation of Job 4:11, which is usually translated as the tiger or old lion perisheth for lack of prey, can be translated as the Myrmicolian antlion perishes for lack of prey. Druce states that its father, being a lion, ate flesh, and its mother, being an ant, ate grains. An antlion produced would possess two natures and would not be able to eat meat or grains. Therefore, antlions were used as symbols for indecisive men. The Western tradition, since St. Gregory the Great, has to do with an insect that eats ants. Medieval writers will primarily cite St. Isidore's description of the antlion in his Etymologies. The antlion, Formicolion, is so called either because it is the lion, Leo, of ants, or more likely, because it is equally an ant and a lion, for it is a small animal very dangerous to ants because it hides itself in the dust and kills the ants carrying grain. And thus it is called both an ant and a lion, because to the rest of the animals it is like an ant, but to the ants it is like a lion. Druce goes on to say that some bestiary writers, such as the scholastic Bartholomaeus Anglicus or Bartholomew the Englishman, thought the antlion to be a type of spider. It is like an ant with a white head, and it has a black body, marked with white spots. And the bite of this creature is as painful as that of wasps. And it is called antlion because it hunts ants like a lion and sucks up the juices from their bodies. But it is devoured by sparrows and other birds just like an ant. In his Morals on the Book of Job, St. Gregory the Great uses the antlion as a symbol for Satan. Which same creature, as we have before shewn, hiding itself in the dust, kills the ants carrying their corn, in that the apostate angel, being cast out of heaven upon the earth in the very pathway of their practice, besets the minds of the righteous, providing for themselves a preventer of good works. And whilst he overcomes them by his snares, he, as it were, kills by surprise the ants carrying their grains. And he is rightly called antlion, i.e., a lion and ant. For as we have said, to the ants he is a lion, but to the birds of the air an ant. In that our old enemy, as he is strong to encounter those that yield to him, is weak against such as resist him. For if consent be yielded to his persuasions, like a lion he can never be sustained. But if resistance be offered, like an ant he is ground in the dust. Therefore to some he is a lion, to others an ant, and that carnal minds sustain his cruel assaults with difficulty, but spiritual minds trample upon his weakness with virtue's foot. St. Albert the Great was the first scholar to determine that this antlion was a type of insect, not a spider. The Grand Medieval Bestiary states that, citing St. Albert, the antlion is not an ant, but closer to the tick in body and has the habits of hiding in the sand. It digs a hemispherical cavity and places its mouth at the center, and when an ant looking for food ventures nearby, captures and devours it. This is a very accurate description of the antlion as we know it today. The antlions that trap and eat ants are actually in the larval stage of their life cycle. Adult antlions have wings and eat nectar and pollen. Famous medieval abbess and doctor of the church, St. Hildegard von Bingen, wrote about the medicinal uses of ants in her book Physica.
1. A person who has much phlegm in his head, chest, or stomach should take an anthill with the ants inside and cook it in water. He should pour that water over a hot stone and draw the steam into his nose and mouth 10 or 15 times. The phlegm will diminish. 2. But one who has superfluity of bad humors in him, the geached or gout, should take an anthill with the ants and cook it in water, preparing a bath. He should get into that bath and keep his whole body in it, exposing only his head covered with a cloth moistened in that same water. If his head were to touch the water in the bath, it would easily be hurt by its strength. He should do this often, and the geached gout will go from him. 3. If someone has leprosy of any kind, he should take the earth where there is a hill of ants, so that it is possible to know how much the ants have dampened that earth. He should place it among the burning embers of beech wood, and let it flare up from these embers, so that the earth exceeds the quantity of embers. He should then let hot water pass through the hot earth 9 times, as if making lye. Then he should mix goat tallow with a little more old pork fat, and put it in the lye water. After it congeals, it should be removed from the water. He should add powdered violets and chamomile, less chamomile than violet, to make an ointment. He should anoint the area of leprosy with the ointment, while he is near the fire, for 9 months or more. He will be healed if the leprosy is not the death of him, or unless God does not want him to be cured. When he is applying the ointment, he should take care not to get near another person or pig. The strong vapor of the leprosy going out of him would infect them. They would easily get leprosy from him. 4. A person who has swellings and scrofula should smear ant eggs on a green oak leaf, spread rooster dung over that, and often place it over the swellings or scrofula, and they will disappear. 5. But if a person is angry or mentally oppressed or sad, he should take young ants, when they still adhere to their eggs, with a bit of the nest in which they lie, and tie them in a linen cloth. Afterward, when he senses the heaviness in his mind, he should loosen the cloth that holds the ants and place them on his heart until it receives their sweat. He will have a calm mind, will be happy, and will receive a good understanding of the matters with which he is occupied.
To the ancients and medievals, ants and antlions were a source of moral edification and intellectual curiosity. Ants were used as models for hard work and industry, while antlions were thought to be symbols of the devil. The Eastern tradition of the antlions retained the more legendary aspects of the monstrous Ethiopian ants, while the Western writers began to figure out the life cycle of the predatory insect, the antlion. I will leave you with a story from Ovid's Metamorphosis that recounts how Zeus turned ants into warriors after his son, Iacchus, begged him for help. Thank you for listening. Please like this video and subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast, I Might Believe in Fairies. Check out more of my bestiary videos and interviews with interesting people on myths, fairy tales, and fantasy. A special thanks to Rachel, my wife, for narrating St. Hildegard's Physica. Give glory to God for all things, and remember, be careful out there. Stupefied by so great an outburst of misery, I said, O Jupiter, if stories not falsely say that thou didst come into the embraces of Aegina, the daughter of Asopus, and thou art not ashamed, great father, to be the parent of myself, either restore my people to me, or else bury me as well in the sepulchre. He gave a signal by lightnings and by propitious thunders. I accepted the omen, and I said, I pray that these may be happy signs of thy intentions. The omen which thou givest me, I accept as a pledge. By chance there was close by an oak sacred to Jupiter, of seed from Dodona, but thinly covered with wide spreading boughs. Here we beheld some ants, the gatherers of corn, in a long train, carrying a heavy burden in their little mouths, and keeping their track in the wrinkled bark. While I was wondering at their numbers, I said, Do thou, most gracious father, give me citizens as many in number, and replenish my empty walls. The lofty oak trembled, and made a noise in its boughs, moving without a breeze. My limbs quivered with trembling fear, and my hair stood on end. Yet I gave kisses to the earth and to the oak, nor did I confess that I had any hopes. And yet I did hope, and I cherished my own wishes in my mind. Night came on, and sleep seized my body, wearied with anxiety. Before my eyes the same oak seemed to be present, and to bear as many branches, and as many animals in its branches, and to be trembling with a similar motion, and to be scattering the grain-bearing troop on the fields below. These suddenly grew, and seemed greater, and raised themselves from the ground, and stood with their bodies upright, and laid aside their leanness, and the former number of their feet, and their sable hue, and assumed in their limbs the human shape. Sleep departs. When now awake, I censured my vision, and complained that there was no help for me from the gods above. But within my palace there was a great murmur, and I seemed to be hearing the voices of men, to which I had now become unaccustomed. While I was supposing that these too were part of my dream, lo, Telamon came in haste, and opening the door, said, Father, thou wilt see things beyond thy hopes or expectations. Do come out. I did go out, and I beheld and recognized such men, each in his turn, as I had seemed to behold in the vision of my sleep. They approached and saluted me as their king. I offered up vows to Jupiter, and divided the city and the lands void of their former tillers, among this new-made people, and I called them Myrmidons, and I did not deprive their name of the marks of their origin. Thou hast beheld their persons. Even still do they retain the manners which they formerly had. And they are a thrifty race, patient of toil, tenacious of what they get, and what they get they lay up. These, alike in years and courage, will attend thee to the war, as soon as the east wind, which brought thee prosperously hither, for the east wind had brought him, shall have changed to the south.